Jules Sterling had everything: a corner office, a family empire, a life that looked perfect from the outside. But when a catastrophic hurricane trapped her in a crumbling mansion with a blue-collar carpenter she'd treated like he was invisible, everything she thought she knew about strength, survival, and love was about to shatter like glass. What started as a collision of two worlds during one terrifying night would force a high-strung heiress to choose between the gilded cage she'd always known and a love powerful enough to rebuild her from the ground up. But when her cold, disapproving mother arrived and old wounds reopened, would Jules find the courage to stand up for the man who saved her life? Or would she retreat into the safety of her past and lose him forever? This is a story of storms that break you, love that heals you, and the moment when you finally choose yourself. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're from, because this journey across class, lines, through heartbreak, and into hope is just beginning. The rain came first as a whisper. Jules Sterling stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her corner office, watching dark clouds roll in from the Atlantic. 43 floors below, Manhattan's streets were already slick and shining. Her phone buzzed against the glass desk behind her. Her mother, again, but she didn't turn around. "Julianne." Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your mother is online too. She says it's urgent." It was always urgent with Eleanor Sterling. Jules pressed her fingertips to the cool glass, leaving small prints that faded almost immediately. She was 32 years old, CEO of Sterling Home Goods, a company her great-grandfather had built from nothing, and she couldn't remember the last time she'd made a decision that felt like her own. She turned and picked up the phone. "Mother." "Finally!" Eleanor's voice was sharp, like ice cracking. "Have you seen the weather? Reports?" "I'm looking at it right now." "Not there. At Sterling Point, the estate. There's a hurricane coming, and we have that photo shoot scheduled for Monday. The house isn't ready. The windows aren't boarded. The gardens are a mess. Sammy called and said he's feeling poorly, and now there's no one to oversee the preparations." Jules closed her eyes. Sterling Point, the sprawling coastal estate in South Carolina where she'd spent miserable childhood summers, walking on eggshells while her mother hosted garden parties and her father disappeared into his study. The house had been sitting mostly empty since he died 5 years ago, except for old Sammy, who kept the grounds and made sure the pipes didn't freeze in winter. "The photo shoot can be rescheduled," Jules said. "Absolutely not. Do you know how hard it was to book that photographer? This spread in Architectural Digest will position us for the fall catalog launch. We need those images, Julianne. I need you to drive down there and make sure everything is handled properly." "Me? Mother, I have meetings all day tomorrow and—" "Cancel them. The brand needs this. Your father built this company for you, and the least you can do is protect its image. Besides, the weather people are always wrong. It'll probably just be rain." Jules looked out at the darkening sky. Her chest felt tight, the way it always did when her mother's expectations pressed down on her like a hand around her throat. "Fine," she heard herself say. "I'll leave tonight." "Good. And Julianne, wear something appropriate. You're representing the family." The line went dead. Jules set the phone down slowly. Her hands were shaking. They shook a lot lately. Tiny tremors she tried to hide during board meetings, during presentations, during the endless performance of being Eleanor Sterling's daughter. She looked at the framed photo on her desk. Her father, smiling in front of Sterling Point on some golden summer afternoon that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. He'd been kind in a distant way, like sunlight through a window. Present, but unreachable. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she whispered to the photograph. "I'm trying." But the truth was, She didn't know what she was trying for anymore. 260 miles south, in a workshop that smelled like sawdust and linseed oil, Darius Thorne ran his hand along the curved arm of a chair. The wood was cherry, rich and warm, with a grain like water flowing. He'd been working on this piece for 3 weeks, carving the back panel with a pattern of oak leaves so detailed you could almost hear them rustling. It was the kind of work that required patience, the kind that reminded him why he'd fallen in love with wood in the first place. His phone buzzed on the workbench. Uncle Sammy. Darius wiped his hands on his jeans and answered. "Hey, Unc. Boy, I need a favor." Sammy's voice sounded thin, stretched tight. "What's wrong? You okay?" "I'm fine. I'm fine. Just, my chest's been acting up a little. Nothing serious, but that storm they're talking about, it's coming in faster than they thought. And the Sterling lady called, Eleanor, said her daughter's driving down tonight and the house needs to be ready." Darius's jaw tightened. The Sterlings. He'd done work at Sterling Point a few times over the years, always hired through Sammy, always treated like he was invisible. Rich white folks who looked through you like you were made of glass. "Let the estate manager handle it," Darius said. "Ain't got one anymore, just me, and I can't be climbing ladders and hauling plywood with my chest feeling like this. Please, Darius, I just need help boarding up the windows on the west wing. 2-3 hours tops." Darius looked at his unfinished chair. He had a client coming Saturday to pick it up. He had plans to seal the windows on his own house tonight, to check on Mrs. Patterson next door who lived alone. But Uncle Sammy had raised him. Sammy, after his daddy died, had taught him how to read a level, how to feel the grain of wood, how to be a man who kept his word. "I'll be there in an hour," Darius said. "Thank you, son. I know you don't like them Sterling folks, but I'm coming for you, not them. You go sit down and rest. I'm serious, Unc." He could hear Sammy's smile through the phone. "Yes, sir. See you soon." Darius hung up and looked around his workshop. The chair would have to wait. He grabbed his keys, his tool belt, and headed to the lumber yard. The wind was already picking up, pushing against his truck like an insistent hand. The radio announcer's voice crackled with urgency. "Hurricane Claudia has been upgraded to Category 3. Landfall expected late tonight. Residents in coastal areas should evacuate immediately." Darius turned up the volume and pressed harder on the gas. Jules's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight her knuckles ached. The drive from New York to South Carolina should have taken 10 hours, but with the weather turning and traffic crawling, it had been nearly 12. Now, as she turned onto the private road that led to Sterling Point, the sky was the color of a bruise. The estate gates were open. Sammy must have unlocked them. The driveway stretched ahead, lined with live oaks draped in Spanish moss that swayed in the wind like ghosts. She'd always hated this place. Too big, too quiet, too full of her mother's voice telling her to sit up straight, speak properly, smile like she meant it. The house appeared through the trees, a white antebellum mansion with tall columns and black shutters, beautiful in the way museums are beautiful. Cold, perfect, empty. Jules parked near the front steps and sat for a moment, trying to calm her breathing. The panic attacks had started 6 months ago. Her doctor called it anxiety. Her mother called it weakness. Jules didn't call it anything. She just tried to survive them. She counted to 10, grabbed her overnight bag, stepped out into the wind. The air smelled like rain and salt. The ocean was just beyond the dunes, and she could hear it roaring, angry and wild. A shiver ran through her that had nothing to do with the temperature. The front door was unlocked. She stepped into the foyer, and the house exhaled around her, cool and dim and utterly silent. "Sammy?" Her voice echoed up the curved staircase. Nothing. She set her bag down, her heels clicking against the marble floor. The house was exactly as she remembered. Antique furniture arranged just so. Family portraits staring down with stern faces. Everything perfectly preserved, like a life that had been pressed between the pages of a book and forgotten. Her phone buzzed, a text from her mother. "Did you arrive? Is everything acceptable?" Jules typed back. "Just got here. Checking now." She walked through the rooms, turning on lights. The parlor, the dining room, the library with its walls of leather-bound books no one had read in decades. Everything was dusty. The windows weren't boarded. There were dead leaves on the sunroom floor. This was a disaster. The photographer would never... A sound made her turn. The front door opening. Heavy footsteps. A man appeared in the foyer doorway, and Jules' breath caught. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and arms that filled out his worn gray t-shirt. His skin was deep brown, his head shaved clean, and his eyes were dark and steady. He carried a toolbox in one hand like it weighed nothing. "Ms. O'Sterling." His voice was low, quiet, not a question. "Who are you?" Jules heard the sharpness in her own voice, the same tone her mother used with staff. "Darius Thorne, Sammy's nephew. He called me to help board up the house." She looked him up and down. Work boots caked with mud, jeans with worn knees. He looked like he belonged outside, not in her foyer, tracking dirt across the white marble. "The windows should have been done already," she said. "And the house isn't ready for the shoot. Where is Sammy?" "He wasn't feeling well. I told him to rest." "That's inconvenient." Something flickered in Darius's eyes, something Jules couldn't read. He set his toolbox down carefully. "The storm's coming fast," he said. "I need to get the west wing secured before the wind picks up. Where do you want me to start?" Jules crossed her arms. "I need this done properly, not just slapped together. These windows are original to the house. They're historic." Darius's jaw tightened just slightly. "I know how to handle historic windows, ma'am. I've been doing restoration work for 15 years. "Fine. But I want them done in a way that doesn't show in the photographs. We have a very important photo shoot scheduled, and..." "Ms. Sterling." He cut her off, his voice still quiet but with steel underneath. "With respect, there isn't going to be any photo shoot if this house floods or the windows blow out. I can make it pretty, or I can make it safe. Your choice." Jules felt heat rise in her face. She wasn't used to being interrupted, being challenged. "Safe, then," she said coldly. "Obviously." "Yes, ma'am." He picked up his toolbox and walked past her toward the west wing. Jules stood there, her heart pounding with an anger she couldn't quite name. Who did he think he was, talking to her like that? Like she was some foolish child who didn't understand priorities? She followed him into the sunroom, ready to say something cutting, but stopped when she saw him kneeling by the French doors, running his hand along the frame with careful attention. "This wood is rotted," he said, not looking at her. "Been letting water in for a while. Needs to be replaced, not just boarded." "Then replace it. Not enough time before the storm. I can seal it temporarily, but you'll need a proper carpenter after this is over." "You're not a proper carpenter?" Now he did look at her, and something in his expression made her feel small. "I'm a master carpenter, Miss Sterling. I'm also trying to save your house, if that's all right with you." Before she could respond, there was a sound from the kitchen, a crash, then a groan. They both moved at once. Sammy was on the floor by the sink, clutching his chest, his face gray. All of Jules' anger vanished. She dropped to her knees beside him. "Sammy, what happened?" But Darius was already there, gentle hands on his uncle's shoulders, checking his pulse. "Uncle Sammy, look at me. Can you breathe?" Sammy nodded, gasping. Just dizzy. Chest got tight. I'm okay. I'm okay. We're calling an ambulance, Jules said, reaching for her phone. Already on it. Darius had his phone to his ear. I need an ambulance at 1847 Coastal Highway. Sterling Point Estate. Elderly male, chest pains, difficulty breathing. He listened. How long? His expression darkened. 45 minutes? There's a hurricane coming. Jules' hands were shaking again. Sammy looked so small on the floor, so fragile. She grabbed a kitchen towel and folded it, sliding it under his head. You're going to be fine, she heard herself say, even though she didn't know if that was true. Darius hung up. Ambulances are all tied up with the evacuation. I'm taking him myself, now. He lifted his uncle like he weighed nothing, cradling him with a gentleness that made Jules' chest ache. She followed them to the door, helpless and useless. You need to leave too, Darius said over his shoulder as he carried Sammy toward his truck. Get in your car and head inland. This storm is serious. I can't. I have to prepare the house. Darius stopped and turned, his eyes fierce. Ms. Sterling, this house doesn't matter. Your life matters. Leave, now. Then he was gone, settling Sammy into the passenger seat, the truck engine roaring to life. Jules stood on the porch, watching the taillights disappear down the driveway. The wind was howling now, bending the trees. Rain began to fall, hard, angry drops that stung her skin. She should leave. She knew she should leave, but her mother's voice was in her head. The brand needs this. Your father built this company for you. And beneath that, quieter, but just as strong. If you leave, you're failing. Again. Jules went back inside and locked the door behind her. She stood in the empty foyer, listening to the house groan and settle around her, and realized with sudden, terrible clarity that she'd never felt more alone in her life. The storm was coming, and she was absolutely, completely unprepared. Darius's hands were tight on the steering wheel. Uncle Sammy sat beside him, breathing shallow but steady. The hospital was 20 minutes away, 15 if Darius pushed it. The rain was coming down harder now, the windshield wipers beating a frantic rhythm. I'm okay, son, Sammy said quietly. Just got dizzy, that's all. You're going to the hospital anyway. That Sterling girl? She shouldn't be there. Alone. Darius's jaw clenched. She's a grown woman. She can take care of herself. Can she? Sammy turned to look at him. Did you see her hands shaking? That girl's scared of her own shadow. Not my problem, Unc. But even as he said it, Darius felt something twist in his gut. The way Jules had knelt beside Sammy, her face pale with genuine worry. The tremor in her voice when she'd said, "You're going to be fine," like she was trying to convince herself as much as Sammy. He pushed the thought away and drove faster. The hospital emergency entrance was chaos. People rushing in with injuries from the storm prep, a man who'd fallen off a ladder, a woman cut by flying debris. Darius helped Sammy inside, and a nurse met them with a wheelchair. "We'll take good care of him," she said, already rolling Sammy toward the exam rooms. "I'll be fine," Sammy called over his shoulder. "Go on home, Darius. Get yourself safe." Darius stood in the fluorescent lighting, surrounded by the smell of antiseptic and fear, and felt suddenly, desperately tired. He was 34 years old. He worked 6 days a week. He took care of his mother, checked on his neighbors, volunteered at the community center teaching woodworking to kids who needed somewhere to go after school. He didn't have space in his life for rich white women who looked at him like he was furniture. He headed toward the exit. Through the glass doors, he could see the storm intensifying. Trees bending, a trash can tumbling across the parking lot. A security guard was setting up barricades. "Sir?" Darius stopped. "They're closing the bridge to the island in 15 minutes. If you need to get across, you need to go now." The island, where Sterling Point sat right on the coast, where Jules Sterling was alone in that big house with rotted window frames and no idea how to survive a hurricane. Darius stood there, torn. She wasn't his responsibility. She'd made it clear what she thought of him. Just another hired hand, someone to boss around and dismiss. But in his mind, he saw that French door with the rotted frame, saw the loose shutter on the east side that he'd noticed when he pulled up, saw Jules' pale face and shaking hands. His daddy had taught him something before he died. Character is what you do when nobody's watching, when there's nothing in it for you. "Damn it," Darius muttered. He ran to his truck. Jules was losing her mind. She tried to close the French doors in the sunroom, but the wind was too strong. It kept tearing them from her hands, slamming them back open. Rain poured through the gap, soaking the antique rug, the wicker furniture. "Close!" she hissed through gritted teeth, throwing her whole body weight against the door. It shut. She fumbled with the lock, finally getting it latched. Her hands were bleeding. She'd cut her palm on something sharp, maybe a splinter from the frame. Blood dripped onto her white blouse. She stumbled back, breathing hard, and looked around at the house. What was she supposed to do? Board the windows? She didn't have plywood, didn't have tools, didn't have the first clue how to prepare a house for a hurricane. Her phone buzzed. Her mother. Jules didn't answer. Instead, she walked through the rooms, watching the storm through the windows. The ocean was invisible in the darkness, but she could hear it, a deep, furious roar that seemed to shake the foundation. She thought about Darius's words. "This house doesn't matter. Your life matters." But her life was bound up in this house, in the company, in being Eleanor Sterling's daughter. If she failed at this, if the house was damaged, if the photo shoot was ruined, her mother would never let her forget it. And maybe that would finally prove what Jules had always suspected, that she wasn't good enough, that she never had been. A massive gust of wind rattled the windows. Jules jumped, her heart racing. She was being ridiculous. Darius was right. She needed to leave. She grabbed her car keys and headed for the front door. But when she opened it, she stopped. The driveway was already flooding. Water rushed past, carrying branches and debris. Her car sat in what was rapidly becoming a river. "No," Jules whispered. "No, no, no." She wasn't leaving. Not now. Not unless she wanted to drive into floodwater and drown. She slammed the door shut and locked it, then slid down to sit on the floor, her back against the wall. This was it. She was trapped here. Alone. The panic came like a wave, her chest tightening, her breath coming too fast, spots dancing in her vision. She pressed her hands over her face and tried to count like her therapist had taught her. 1, 2, 3. But the numbers wouldn't come. There was only the sound of the storm and the terrible crushing fear that she was going to die here in this house she'd always hated. Then, headlights. Jules' head jerked up. Through the sidelight window, she saw a truck, fighting its way up the flooded driveway, water spraying from its tires. The engine cut. A door opened, and Darius Thorne ran through the rain toward the porch. He was soaked before he made it halfway to the house. The wind nearly knocked him sideways. Rain pelted his face like tiny fists. But Darius kept moving, his toolbox in one hand, a bag of emergency supplies in the other. He hit the porch steps and took them 2 at a time. The door flew open. Jules stood there, her face white, her eyes huge. What are you? Get inside, he shouted over the wind. She scrambled back. He pushed through the door and slammed it shut behind him, the sound of the storm immediately muffled. Water dripped from his clothes onto the marble floor. They stood there, breathing hard, staring at each other. You came back, Jules said. Her voice was barely a whisper. Yeah. Why? Darius set down his toolbox and the supply bag. He met her eyes. Because you were going to get yourself killed. Sammy, is he okay? He's at the hospital. They're taking care of him. Darius looked around the foyer, assessing. You should have left. I tried. The driveway's flooded. I know. I barely made it across the bridge before they closed it. Jules wrapped her arms around herself. She was shaking again, he noticed. Not just her hands this time, her whole body. I don't know what to do, she said, and there was something raw in her voice. Something honest. Darius's anger melted a little. First thing, we need to secure the house. That French door in the sunroom won't hold much longer. I saw a shutter loose on the east side, and we need to seal the... A sound like a rifle shot cracked through the air. Darius heard it before he understood it. The groan of wood, the sharp snap of roots tearing from earth. Down! He moved without thinking, crossing the foyer in 2 strides, tackling Jules to the ground just as the massive oak tree outside crashed through the conservatory. Glass exploded inward. The sound was deafening, shattering, crashing, the scream of wood and metal tearing apart. Darius covered Jules' body with his own, shielding her head with his arms. Debris rained down around them. Something sharp hit his shoulder, but he didn't move, didn't breathe. Finally, the noise stopped. Slowly, Darius lifted his head. The conservatory was destroyed. The tree had punched through the glass ceiling, its massive trunk wedged at an angle, branches everywhere. Wind and rain poured in. Are you hurt? He looked down at Jules beneath him. Her eyes were wide, terrified. She shook her head. You sure? I was standing right there, she whispered, right where that tree came through. If you hadn't... She didn't finish. Couldn't finish. Darius helped her sit up. There was dust in her hair, a scrape on her cheek. But she was alive. We need to move, he said. Now. That opening is going to let the storm tear this whole place apart if we don't seal it. Jules nodded, still in shock. Together, they scrambled to their feet. Darius grabbed his toolbox and ran toward the conservatory, Jules right behind him. The destruction was worse up close. The tree had taken out most of the glass ceiling and one wall. Rain lashed through the gap. The floor was already an inch deep in water. There! Darius pointed to the doors that led from the conservatory to the main hall. We seal those doors. We save the rest of the house. Come on. They ran back to the hallway. Darius pulled out heavy plastic sheeting from his supply bag and started unfurling it. Hold this! He shoved one end at Jules. She grabbed it, and together they stretched it across the doorway. Darius nailed it to the frame with quick, practiced movements. The wind tried to tear it from their hands, but they held on. More! Darius pulled out duct tape. Seal the edges! Jules tore off strips of tape with her teeth and slapped them against the plastic, working. Beside him, without hesitation. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. She was focused, determined. When they finished, the makeshift barrier was holding. Not perfect, but enough. Then the lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed them. Jules gasped. It's okay, Darius said. He pulled a flashlight from his tool belt and clicked it on. The beam cut through the black. Power grid probably went down. I've got lanterns in my bag. He led her back to the foyer, then to the kitchen, The most central room with no exterior windows. The safest place in the house. Darius set up a camping lantern on the counter. Warm light filled the space. Jules stood in the middle of the kitchen, soaking wet, bleeding, covered in dust. She looked lost. "Sit down," Darius said gently. He pulled out one of the kitchen chairs. She sat without argument. He found the first aid kit in his supply bag and knelt in front of her. "Let me see your hand." Jules held out her palm. The cut wasn't deep, but it was dirty. Darius cleaned it carefully, his large hands surprisingly gentle. She flinched when the antiseptic stung. "Sorry," he said. "It's okay." He wrapped her hand with gauze, securing it with medical tape. The intimacy of the moment settled around them, him kneeling at her feet, her watching his face in the lantern light. "Thank you," Jules said quietly. "You saved my life." Darius looked up at her. "You're welcome. And I'm sorry for earlier, for treating you like you didn't matter." He sat back on his heels, studying her. "Why did you?" Jules looked away. "I don't know. Maybe because that's how my mother treats everyone. Maybe because it's easier than admitting I was terrified and had no idea what I was doing." "You could have just asked for help." "Sterling women don't ask for help. We give orders." She smiled, but it was bitter. "That's what my mother always said." Darius stood and went to his supply bag. He pulled out a camping stove and a small kettle. "I'm making tea. You want some?" "You brought tea to a hurricane?" "Uncle Sammy taught me to always be prepared. Hot tea keeps you calm in a crisis." He lit the camping stove and set the kettle on it. The small blue flame was cheerful, almost normal. Jules watched him work. Economical movements, everything done with purpose and care. "I don't know how to use one of those," she admitted. "A camping stove?" "Any of this. I can run a board meeting, I can negotiate a contract, but I can't survive. Not really." Darius glanced at her. "You're surviving right now. Only because you're here." "Well," he shrugged. "That's what people do, help each other." The kettle whistled. He poured hot water into 2 mugs, added tea bags from his supplies. "Sugar?" "Please." He handed her the mug. Their fingers touched briefly, and Jules felt a spark of something she couldn't name. They sat at the kitchen table, drinking tea while the storm raged outside. The house groaned and creaked around them, but in the small circle of lantern light, they were safe. "You aren't useless," Darius said after a while. Jules looked up, surprised. "You're just out of your element. There's a difference." She felt tears sting her eyes and blinked them back. "Thank you for saying that." "It's the truth." They sat in silence, listening to the wind. Then a new sound, dripping water, steady and insistent. Darius was on his feet immediately. "Where's that coming from?" They followed the sound to the hallway. Water was leaking from the ceiling right over the portrait gallery. Dozens of Sterling family paintings, some over 100 years old. "No!" Jules ran forward. "These are irreplaceable." "Then we save them." Darius was already grabbing buckets from under the kitchen sink. "You catch the water. I'll patch the ceiling." They worked together in the darkness, their movements synchronized. Jules positioned buckets and moved paintings while Darius climbed a ladder to seal the leak with plastic sheeting and duct tape. When a bucket filled, she'd dump it in the sink and bring it back. When he needed tape, she'd hand it up to him. They found a rhythm, a partnership. When the leak was finally sealed and the paintings safe, they stood in the hallway, breathing hard, and looked at each other. Jules started laughing. It bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her. a slightly hysterical, exhausted laugh that she couldn't stop. Darius stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Then, slowly, his mouth curved into a smile. And then he was laughing too. They laughed until Jules had to lean against the wall, until Darius wiped his eyes, until the fear and adrenaline drained away and left something lighter behind. "We did it," Jules said. "Yeah, we did." And for the first time since she'd arrived at Sterling Point, Jules didn't feel alone. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she needed to be. Midnight came and went. They'd retreated to the library, the driest room, with built-in bookshelves that blocked some of the storm noise. Darius spread out blankets from his supply bag on the floor. Jules grabbed pillows from the nearby sitting room. They sat with their backs against the shelves, the lantern between them casting long shadows. "How's your shoulder?" Jules asked. She'd noticed him favoring it. "Just bruised. I'll live." "You got hurt protecting me." "It's fine, Miss Sterling." "Jules, please, after everything tonight, I think you can call me Jules." He nodded. Jules. The way he said her name, careful, respectful, made something warm unfold in her chest. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "Why do you do this? The carpentry, the restoration work?" "Uncle Sammy mentioned you studied architecture." Darius was quiet for a moment. "I did, 2 years at State. Then my dad got cancer, medical bills piled up. I dropped out to work construction, help pay the bills." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I learned more on job sites than I ever did in a classroom. And I found out I loved working with my hands, creating something that lasts." He ran his fingers along the edge of the bookshelf. "This house, it's 150 years old. The people who built it are long gone, but their work remains. That means something." Jules looked at him in the lantern light. This man who saw beauty in old wood, who'd driven into a hurricane to save her, who treated his dying uncle with such tenderness. "What about you?" Darius asked. "You always want to run a company?" "No." The word came out before Jules could stop it. "I wanted to be an art teacher. I was good at it in college. I loved watching kids discover they could create something. But after my father died, my mother needed me to take over Sterling Home Goods, the family legacy. So I did." "And you hate it." It wasn't a question. Jules swallowed hard. "I'm good at it. I've grown the company 30% in 5 years. But every day feels like wearing shoes that don't fit. Like pretending to be someone I'm not." "Then why keep doing it?" "Because it's what's expected. Because I owe it to my father. Because if I walk away, I'm admitting I'm a failure." Darius shook his head. "That's not failure. That's courage. Knowing what you want and going after it, that's the hardest thing there is." Jules felt tears slip down her cheeks. She wiped them away quickly, embarrassed. "Hey." Darius's voice was gentle. "It's okay to cry. Been a rough night." "I don't cry. Sterling women don't—" "Jules." He cut her off. "You're not just a Sterling woman, you're a person. And persons get to cry." She laughed through her tears. "Is persons even a word?" "It is now." They smiled at each other, and Jules felt something shift between them. The class barrier, the race barrier, all the walls she'd built around herself, they were still there, but they felt thinner now, more fragile. "Thank you," she said, "for coming back, for staying, for seeing me." Darius held her gaze. "You're easy to see, Jules, once you stop trying so hard to be invisible." The words settled into her heart like seeds. Outside, the wind shifted. The howling stopped. An eerie silence fell over the house. Darius tensed. "That's the eye." The eye of the hurricane? Yeah, the calm in the middle. It'll pass over us for maybe 30 minutes. Then the back wall hits, usually worse than the first half. He stood and offered his hand. Want to see it? Jules took his hand, warm, calloused, strong, and let him pull her to her feet. They walked to the back door, the one that led to the covered porch. Darius opened it carefully. The air outside was perfectly still, humid and heavy, like the world was holding its breath. Through the broken trees, Jules could see the moon, just a sliver, but enough to illuminate the devastation. Branches everywhere. Part of the roof missing from the garage. The gardens completely destroyed. But above it all, stars. Thousands of them, visible through the broken clouds. It's beautiful, Jules whispered. Yeah. But Darius wasn't looking at the sky. He was looking at her. Jules turned and found him standing close, closer than she'd realized. She could feel the heat coming off his body, could see the gold flecks in his dark brown eyes. The back wall's coming, he said quietly. We should get back inside. But neither of them moved. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and danger and something neither of them could name. Then the wind returned, a low moan building to a roar. Come on! Darius grabbed her hand and pulled her back inside, slamming the door just as the storm hit again. This time, it was worse. The house shuddered. Something upstairs crashed. A window shattered somewhere. They could hear the glass falling. Upstairs! Darius shouted over the noise. That shutter I saw! It must have torn loose! They ran up the main staircase. The shutter was banging against the side of the house like a drum, and with each impact, cracks spread across the window glass. We have to close it! Jules yelled. It's too dangerous! But the window was already cracking. In seconds, it would shatter completely, and the storm would pour into the house. Darius made a decision. He grabbed the window latch and threw his weight against it, forcing it open against the wind. The shutter swung wildly. Help me! He shouted. Jules didn't hesitate. She ran to him, and together they grabbed the shutter, pulling it toward them. The wind fought them every inch. Jules's arms burned. Her hands slipped on the wet wood. Almost, Darius grunted. Just a little more. With a final heave, they pulled the shutter flush against the window frame. Darius grabbed the latch and secured it. But they were pressed together now, Darius's arms around her as he held the latch, Jules's back against his chest, both of them breathing hard. The window held. Slowly, Darius let go. But he didn't step back, and Jules didn't move away. They stood there, hearts racing, the storm raging around them. Jules, Darius said, his voice rough. She turned in his arms. Their faces were inches apart. She could feel his breath on her lips. Outside, the wind screamed. Inside, time stopped. And in that moment, Jules knew with absolute certainty that her life had just changed forever. Dawn came gray and exhausted. Jules woke on the library floor, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like sawdust and rain. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back, the storm, the tree, the way Darius had covered her body with his own, the way they'd almost kissed on the stairs. She sat up slowly. Her whole body ached. Darius was across the room, standing at the window with his back to her. The lantern had burned out hours ago, but pale morning light filtered through the shutters. The house was silent. The storm had passed. Hey, she said softly. He turned. There were shadows under his eyes. He probably hadn't slept at all. Hey, how are you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck. She stood, wincing, but alive, thanks to you. Darius gave a small smile. We did it together. Jules walked to the window and looked out. The damage was worse in daylight. Trees down everywhere. The conservatory completely destroyed. Debris scattered across what used to be manicured lawns. But the main house had survived. Battered and bruised, but standing. I need to check the generator, Darius said. The sump pump in the basement. If it's not running, we could flood. I'll come with you. You should rest. I'm not letting you go out there alone. He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. Then he nodded. Okay, but stay close. They walked through the house, assessing the damage. Water had leaked into several upstairs rooms. The conservatory was a total loss. But the kitchen was dry, the library intact, and most of the family portraits had survived. Outside, the morning air was cool and clean, washed by the storm. Everything sparkled with wetness. Darius led the way to the generator shed, stepping carefully over fallen branches. The generator was running, but barely. Darius opened the housing and checked the connections. Fuel's low, he said. I'll need to refill it, but it should keep the sump pump going for now. On the way back to the house, his foot slipped in the mud. He went down hard, landing on his side with a grunt. Darius! Jules rushed to him, dropping to her knees in the mud beside him. Are you okay? He sat up slowly, mud covering his jeans and shirt. Yeah, just clumsy. You're hurt. She could see pain in his eyes, the way he was holding his ribs. Just bruised, from last night. Let me help you. Jules offered her hand. He took it, and she pulled him to his feet. He swayed slightly, and without thinking, Jules wrapped her arm around his waist to steady him. They stood there, close together, her arm around him, his hand on her shoulder. Thank you, he said quietly. You've been taking care of me all night. It's my turn. They walked back to the house together, and Jules felt something settle in her chest, a warmth, a rightness. Inside, she made him sit at the kitchen table while she found the first aid kit. She dampened a clean towel and gently wiped the mud from his face. Darius watched her, very still. You don't have to do this. I know. She carefully cleaned a cut above his eyebrow. But I want to. Her fingers brushed his temple, and she felt him inhale sharply. Their eyes met. Jules, he said, his voice low. I need to tell you something. Her heart started pounding. What? But before he could answer, they heard it, the distant thump of helicopter blades. Darius stood and went to the window. Emergency survey crews. They're checking on people. Then another sound. Ah, car engine. Jules' stomach dropped. She knew that sound. Her mother's Mercedes SUV. No, she whispered. But it was too late. Through the window, she watched the black SUV navigate carefully through the debris-filled driveway. It parked near the front steps, and Eleanor Sterling emerged, immaculate even in a crisis, wearing a cream-colored suit and heels. Of course she came, Jules said, her voice flat. Of course. Darius looked at her. Who is it? My mother. Something in her tone made him tense. The front door opened. Eleanor had a key, naturally, and her voice rang through the house. Julianne, where are you? My God, look at this mess! Jules felt herself transforming. Her spine straightened. Her face went blank. She became the person her mother expected, the perfect daughter, the competent CEO. I'm here, Mother, she called out, walking toward the foyer. Darius followed. Eleanor swept into view, her eyes taking in the debris, the boarded windows, the water, damage. Then her gaze landed on Darius, and her expression turned cold. You? She looked him up and down like he was something unpleasant she'd stepped in. "You're Sammy's nephew, the carpenter." "Yes, ma'am," Darius said, his voice carefully neutral. "Well, I hope you didn't steal anything during the storm. I know how these situations can be opportunistic." Jules felt like she'd been slapped. "Mother!" "What? I'm just being practical, Julianne. We don't know this man." "He saved my life," Jules said, but her voice was weak, apologetic. "I'm sure he did his job adequately. Now, has anything valuable been damaged? The portraits? The silver?" Darius's face had gone completely still. The warmth Jules had seen in his eyes was gone, replaced by something hard and distant. "The portraits are fine," he said quietly. "I need to check on my uncle." He turned and walked toward the back door. "Wait," Jules said. "Darius, wait." But he didn't stop. Eleanor watched him go, then turned to Jules. "Really, Julianne? Letting him track mud through the house? I raised you better than that." Jules stood frozen. She should have defended him, should have told her mother exactly what Darius had done, how he'd risked his life, how he'd been the only one who'd stayed. But the words wouldn't come. Years of training, of being the good daughter, of never contradicting Eleanor Sterling. It all rose up and choked her. "I'm sorry, Mother," she heard herself say, and she hated herself for it. Darius drove away from Sterling Point with his hands gripping the wheel so tight his knuckles hurt. He'd been a fool, an absolute fool. For a few hours in the dark, he'd let himself believe that Jules was different. That beneath the designer clothes and the anxious perfectionism, there was a woman who saw him as an equal, who valued him. But the moment her mother walked in, Jules had transformed back into exactly what she was, a Sterling. Someone who lived in a world where people like Darius were invisible labor. The hesitation in her voice when her mother accused him of theft. The way she hadn't defended him fast enough. The apology to her mother instead of to him. It all said the same thing. He didn't belong in her world. He pulled into the hospital parking lot and sat for a moment, breathing hard. His ribs ached. His shoulder throbbed. His heart felt like someone had taken a hammer to it. Inside, he found Uncle Sammy sitting up in bed, looking tired, but alive. "There he is." Sammy smiled. "I heard the storm was bad. You okay?" "I'm fine, Unc. How are you feeling?" "Good. The doctors say it was just stress on my heart. Need to take it easier, they say. Like, I don't know that already." Sammy studied Darius's face. "What happened?" "Nothing." "Boy, don't lie to your uncle. What happened?" Darius sat down heavily in the chair beside the bed. "I stayed at Sterling Point during the storm. Kept the house from falling apart. Kept Miss Sterling safe. And her mother showed up this morning and treated me like a criminal. And Jules just let her." Sammy was quiet for a moment. "You got feelings for that girl." It wasn't a question. Darius looked away. "Doesn't matter. We're from different worlds, Unc. I should have remembered that." "Different worlds." Sammy shook his head. "That's just fear talking. Fear dressed up as common sense. It's not fear, it's reality. Reality is, you're a good man who deserves to be treated with respect. Reality is that girl looked at you different than other folks do. I saw it when I was on the floor. The way she worried over both of us. That wasn't an act. It doesn't matter what I saw in the dark. What matters is what happened in the daylight." Sammy reached out and gripped Darius's hand. "Don't give up on her yet, son. Sometimes people need time to find their courage." But Darius had already made up his mind. He'd finished the restoration work he'd been hired for on the church. He'd take care of his mother and Uncle Sammy. He'd keep his head down and his heart closed. He'd been hurt before by people who made him feel less than. He wouldn't let it happen again. Not even for Jules Sterling. 3 days passed, like years. Jules went through the motions. She drove back to New York. She went to the office. She sat in meetings and gave presentations and signed contracts. But inside, she felt hollow. At night, alone in her sterile apartment, she couldn't stop thinking about Darius. The way he'd looked at her in the lantern light. The gentleness in his hands when he'd bandaged her cut. The strength in his voice when he'd said, "You're easy to see, Jules," and the coldness in his eyes when he'd walked away. She'd tried to call him twice. Both times, it went to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. What could she say? "I'm sorry I didn't defend you to my mother. I'm sorry I reverted to being the coward I've always been. I'm sorry I let you walk away." On the 4th day, Jules sat in her office staring at a proposal on her computer screen. She'd read the same paragraph 5 times and still had no idea what it said. Her phone rang. Marcus Chen, the company's VP of Development. "Jules, good news. I've found a buyer for Sterling Point." Her stomach dropped. "What?" "A development group. They want to tear down the house and build luxury condos. The location is perfect, right on the coast. They're offering $15 million. "Absolutely not." "Jules, be reasonable. That house is a money pit. Between the storm damage and the ongoing maintenance, it's costing us a fortune. This is a solid offer." I said no. "Then at least think about it. I'm calling a board meeting for Friday. We can discuss it then." He hung up before she could argue. Jules sat very still, her heart pounding. Tear down Sterling Point. Destroy the library where she and Darius had talked about their dreams. Erase the kitchen where they'd drunk tea during the storm. Replace it all with sterile condos that looked like every other building on the coast. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "The board meeting is a good idea. That house is nothing but trouble. We should sell." Jules stared at the words. For her entire life, she'd done what was expected. Taken over the company. Lived in the right apartment. Wore the right clothes. Said the right things. And she was miserable. Darius's words came back to her. "That's not failure. That's courage. Knowing what you want and going after it. That's the hardest thing there is." Jules stood up. She grabbed her purse and her keys. Her assistant looked up in surprise. "Miss Sterling? Where are you going? You have a meeting in 10 minutes. "Cancel it," Jules said. "Cancel everything." "But everything." And she walked out. The drive to South Carolina took 10 hours. Jules drove straight through, stopping only for gas and coffee. She'd changed out of her suit somewhere in Virginia, pulling on jeans and a t-shirt in a rest stop bathroom. Her mother would have had a heart attack. The thought made Jules smile. It was after dark when she reached the coast. The bridge to the island was open now, repaired after the storm. She crossed it with her hands steady on the wheel, no shaking, no panic. She didn't go to Sterling Point. She went into town, to the address Sammy had mentioned on the phone, the old community church where Darius was working on a restoration project. The church sat on a quiet street, white clapboard with a tall steeple. Lights were on inside, and through the windows, Jules could see someone moving. She parked and got out. Her heart was pounding, but this time it wasn't fear. It was something else. Something that felt like hope. She opened the church door. Inside, the space had been gutted for renovation. Scaffolding lined the walls. Drop cloths covered the floor. And in the center of it all, Darius stood on a ladder, sanding a piece of crown, molding. He heard the door and looked down. When he saw Jules, he went very still. Then he climbed down slowly, setting his sandpaper aside. They stood 20 feet apart, the empty church echoing around them. "Hi," Jules said. "Hi." His voice was guarded. "I'm sorry. For what happened with my mother. For not defending you. For being a coward." Darius's jaw was tight. "Why are you here, Jules?" "Because I can't stop thinking about you. Because every time I close my eyes, I see the way you looked at me in the storm. Because I've spent my whole life doing what other people expected, and I'm done." "What does that mean?" "It means I told my mother and the board that Sterling Point isn't for sale. It means I fired Marcus when he pushed back. It means I'm taking a sabbatical from the company." She took a step closer. "It means I'm choosing myself for the first time in my life. And part of choosing myself is choosing you, if you'll let me." Darius stood very still. "I don't fit in your world." "Then I don't want that world." Jules took another step. "I want the one where we survived the storm, where we saved the paintings together, where you made me tea and told me I wasn't useless." "Jules, I know I hurt you. I know I have a lot to prove. But I'm asking for a chance. Not as your employer. Not as some rich woman looking for a project. Just as me, as Jules, asking if you'd be willing to give us a chance." Darius looked at her for a long moment. She could see the war happening in his eyes, the want fighting with the hurt, the hope fighting with the fear. "You hurt me," he said finally, "when you didn't defend me, when you let your mother treat me like that. I know, and I'm so sorry. I've been hurt before by people who made me feel less than. I won't go through that again. I won't ask you to. I'm not perfect, Darius. I'm probably going to mess up sometimes. But I promise you, I will never let anyone treat you as less than again, including my mother. Especially my mother." He took a breath. "What are you asking for here?" "A chance, a real chance, to get to know each other outside of a crisis, to see if what we felt during the storm is real. And if your mother disapproves, if your board disapproves, if your whole world thinks you're making a mistake," Jules smiled, "then they can disapprove. I'm done living for other people's opinions." Darius walked toward her slowly. With each step, Jules' heart beat faster. He stopped in front of her, close enough to touch. "You're serious about this," he said. "Completely. You're really going to stand up to your mother?" "I already did. She's furious. She threatened to remove me from the board." Jules laughed. "I told her to go ahead. I'm tired of being afraid of her." Something shifted in Darius's expression. The guardedness cracked, and underneath, Jules saw the warmth she remembered from the storm. "You drove all the way down here just to tell me this?" he said. "I would have driven twice as far." "Jules Sterling." He shook his head slowly, a small smile playing at his lips. "You're something else. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" Instead of answering, Darius reached up and cupped her face in his hands, those strong, calloused hands that had kept her safe through the hurricane. "It's a good thing," he said softly. "It's a very good thing." And then he kissed her. It was nothing like the almost kiss on the stairs. This was real, certain. A promise and a question and an answer all at once. Jules melted into him, her hands gripping his shoulders, and felt something inside her finally relax. This was what coming home felt like. Not Sterling Point, not the office. This, him. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. "So," Jules said, "does this mean you're willing to give us a chance?" Darius smiled, a real smile, the one that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "Yeah, I'm willing to give us a chance." "Good, because I have a proposal for you." "Oh?" Sterling Point needs a full restoration after the storm damage. I want to hire you, not your company, you personally, to restore it the right way, to make it beautiful again. Darius raised an eyebrow. That's a 6-month project at least. I know. I'm planning to stay at the estate while the work is done. Thought I might start that art program I've been dreaming about. Use the house for community classes, give back instead of just taking. You're really doing this, changing your whole life. I'm trying to. It's scary, but... She smiled. I've survived a hurricane. I can survive this. Darius pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. You know your mother is going to hate me. She already does. Might as well give her a good reason. He laughed, and the sound filled the empty church like music. Outside, night had fallen completely. But inside, in the circle of dusty work lights and scattered tools, Jules felt brighter than she had in years. She was done being the person everyone expected, done shrinking herself to fit into someone else's vision. She was choosing herself, choosing courage, choosing love, and it felt like flying. 6 months later, Sterling Point looked like a different house. Or maybe it looked like itself again, the way it was meant to be before years of cold perfection had stripped away its warmth. Jules stood in the newly restored conservatory, watching morning light pour through the glass ceiling. Where the oak tree had crashed through, Darius had rebuilt everything with meticulous care. New glass, yes, but also new purpose. The space wasn't a showroom anymore. It was a classroom. Easels lined the walls. Paint-splattered dropcloths covered the floor. Children's artwork hung on strings like colorful flags. Watercolor sunsets, finger-painted flowers, crayon portraits of families and dogs and dreams. The Sterling Point Community Art Center had been open for 3 months, and already it was the heart of the house. "Ms. Jules," a small voice called out. Jules turned to see Maya, one of her youngest students, running toward her with a painting held high. The little girl was 7, with dark braids and a smile that could light up a room. "Look what I made! It's my mama!" The portrait was mostly purple and green, Maya's favorite colors, with a lopsided smile and eyes like sunbursts. "It's beautiful," Jules said, kneeling down. "Your mama is going to love it." "Can we hang it up?" "Absolutely. Go pick your favorite spot." Maya ran off, and Jules felt that now familiar warmth in her chest. This was what she was meant to do. Not board meetings or profit margins. This. Footsteps sounded behind her. She knew those footsteps, the steady, purposeful rhythm of someone who never rushed, but always arrived exactly when needed. "Morning," Darius said. Jules turned and smiled. He was covered in sawdust, his t-shirt sticking to him from the heat, a pencil tucked behind his ear. He'd been working on the library shelves all morning, replacing the water-damaged sections with new wood that he'd stained and aged to match the original. "Morning yourself. How's it going in there?" "Almost done. Come see." He offered his hand, and Jules took it without hesitation. 6 months, and the simple act of holding his hand still sent little sparks of joy through her. They walked together through the house, past the kitchen where Uncle Sammy was teaching a cooking class to teenagers, past the parlor that now served as a reading room, past the dining room where community meetings were held every Tuesday night. The house was alive, full of voices and laughter and purpose. In the library, Darius's work was stunning. The new shelves blended seamlessly with the old, and he'd added small, carved details in the corners. Oak leaves, like the ones on his chair, a subtle signature. "Darius, this is incredible." "Yeah?" He looked genuinely pleased. "I wanted to honor the original craftsmanship while making it stronger. Like learning from the past, but building for the future." Jules looked at him, this man who spoke in metaphors without realizing it, who saw deeper meanings in grain patterns and joinery. "That's what we're doing, isn't it?" she said softly. "Learning from the past, building for the future." He smiled and pulled her close. "Yeah, I guess we are." They stood there in the quiet library, holding each other, and Jules thought about how far she'd come. The first month had been the hardest. Her mother had stopped speaking to her entirely. The board had voted her out as CEO. She'd expected that, even welcomed it. Marcus had taken over the company, and the last Jules heard, profits were down 15%. She didn't care. She'd sold her Manhattan apartment and moved into Sterling Point permanently. She'd enrolled in art education courses at the local community college. She'd started small, just a few classes for neighborhood kids, and watched it grow organically into something real. And she'd fallen more deeply in love with Darius every single day. It hadn't been perfect. They'd fought sometimes, about money, about her tendency to overplan everything, about his stubborn independence. But they'd learned to talk through it, to listen, to choose each other even when it was hard. "I need to show you something," Darius said now, pulling back slightly. "What?" "It's a surprise. Come on." He led her upstairs to the room he'd been using as his workshop, the old master bedroom that Jules had never been able to enter without feeling her mother's disapproval. Inside, covered with a sheet, was something roughly the size of a small table. "I've been working on this for 3 months," Darius said. "Wanted to wait until it was perfect." He pulled off the sheet. Jules gasped. It was a hope chest, a beautiful wooden trunk carved, with intricate scenes. She recognized them immediately. The conservatory with its glass ceiling. The kitchen where they'd drunk tea during the storm. The library where they'd first really talked. The porch where they'd stood in the eye of the hurricane. Their story, carved into wood that would last generations. "Darius," she breathed, "it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Open it." With shaking hands, Jules lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a small carved bird, the one he'd been working on during the storm, finally finished. And beneath it, a folded piece of paper. Jules picked up the paper and unfolded it. It was the sketch she'd made of him sleeping. She'd thought she'd lost it. "You kept it," she said. "Found it in my tool belt after I left that morning. Almost threw it away, I was so angry." He smiled. "But I couldn't, because even then, part of me knew you were different, knew what we had was real." Jules set the sketch down, carefully, and turned to face him. Darius took both her hands in his. "Jules Sterling, you have changed my life. You've shown me that courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about being afraid and choosing love anyway. You walked away from everything you knew to build something better, something true, and I want to build the rest of my life with you." He knelt down, and Jules' heart stopped. From his pocket, he pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was a ring, simple and beautiful, with a band carved from dark wood and a small diamond that caught the light. "I made the band myself," Darius said, "from a piece of the oak tree that fell during the storm. Figured we should keep something from that night. The night everything changed." Tears were streaming down Jules' face. "Julianne Sterling, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said immediately. "Yes, yes, yes." Darius slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, like everything else about them, and stood to kiss her. Jules wrapped her arms around his neck and held on tight, laughing and crying at the same time. When they finally pulled apart, she looked at the ring on her hand. The wood was warm against her skin, and the diamond sparkled like a promise. Your mother is going to have a heart attack, Darius said. Good, maybe it'll loosen her up a little. He laughed, that deep, wonderful sound that still made her knees weak. When should we tell people? Jules asked. How about right now? Now? Darius gestured toward the window. Looks like we've got an audience. Jules looked out and laughed. Uncle Sammy was standing in the garden with a huge grin on his face, giving them a thumbs up. Maya and several other students were jumping up and down and waving. Did you tell them you were going to propose? Sammy figured it out. The man's too observant for his own good. Jules leaned against Darius, watching their community celebrate in the garden below. I never thought I could be this happy. Me neither. Thank you. For what? For coming back during the storm, for seeing me when I couldn't see myself, for showing me what real strength looks like. Darius kissed the top of her head. You did the hard part. You chose to change. I just walked beside you. They stood together, looking out at the life they'd built, messy and imperfect and utterly real. The wedding was 3 months later, in the conservatory. Eleanor came, though she spent the entire ceremony looking like she'd swallowed something sour. She wore black, as if mourning, and sat in the back row with her arms crossed. Jules didn't care. She stood at the altar in a simple white dress. No designer label, no elaborate train, just cotton and lace that made her feel like herself. Her flowers were wildflowers from the estate gardens. Her something borrowed was Sammy's pocket watch. Her something blue was paint stain under her fingernails from teaching that morning. And Darius stood waiting for her in a perfectly tailored suit, with tears in his eyes and a smile on his face. The ceremony was simple. They'd written their own vows. Jules went first, her voice steady and clear. Darius, you taught me that I was stronger than I knew. That courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and choosing to act anyway. You showed me what it means to be truly seen and to see someone else with equal clarity. I promise to stand beside you, to choose you every day, and to build a life filled with purpose and love and the kind of beauty that lasts. I promise to never let anyone make you feel less than the incredible man you are. And I promise to keep painting, even though we both know I'm terrible at it. Everyone laughed, including Darius, who wiped his eyes. Then it was his turn. Jules, when I met you, I thought I knew exactly who you were, but you surprised me. You keep surprising me. You walked away from a life that was killing you and built something better. You turned this house from a museum into a home. You take broken things and make them whole again, including me. I promise to build our future with the same care I'd give to any piece of wood, with patience, with attention, with love. I promise to see you, always. And I promise that when the next storm comes, because storms always come, I'll be right there beside you. We'll face it together. Jules was crying now, happy tears that she didn't bother to hide. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the officiant said. You may kiss your bride. Darius pulled Jules close and kissed her like they were the only two people in the world. The conservatory erupted in cheers and applause. As they walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, Jules caught her mother's eye. Eleanor's expression was still disapproving, still cold. But Jules smiled at her anyway, not seeking approval, not apologizing, just acknowledging her presence with the kind of quiet strength she'd learned from the man beside her. And then she walked out into the sunlight with her husband, toward the life they'd chosen together. The reception was in the gardens, long tables covered with mismatched tablecloths, string lights hung between the trees, a local band playing jazz and blues, children running between the chairs, Uncle Sammy telling embarrassing stories about young Darius, Mrs. Patterson from next door teaching people a line dance. It was chaotic and loud and absolutely perfect. Jules stood at the edge of it all for a moment, just watching. Darius came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Happy?" he asked. "Beyond happy. I didn't know life could feel like this." "Like what?" "Full. Real. Like I finally fit in my own skin." They swayed together to the music, and Jules thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago. Anxious, trapped, living someone else's dream. That woman felt like a stranger now. "What are you thinking about?" Darius asked. "How far we've come. How the worst night of my life turned into the beginning of the best thing that ever happened to me." "The storm." "The storm," she agreed. "And you, coming back for me. I'll always come back for you." "I know." Maya ran up to them, her flower girl dress already stained with grass and frosting. "Ms. Jules, Mr. Darius, come dance with us." They let themselves be pulled onto the makeshift dance floor, where kids and adults were spinning and laughing under the string lights. Jules kicked off her shoes and danced in the grass, her white dress swirling around her legs, her hand in her husband's hand. Later, as the sun began to set, Uncle Sammy stood up to give a toast. "I've known Darius since he was knee-high to a grasshopper," he said, his voice carrying across the garden. "And I've never seen him as happy as he is today. Jules, you've given him something precious, not just your love, but your courage. You chose the hard path, the real path, and in doing so, you've shown all of us what it means to live authentically." He raised his glass. "To Jules and Darius, may your foundation be strong, may your walls be flexible, and may your roof always keep out the rain." "To Jules and Darius!" everyone echoed. As the sky turned pink and gold, Darius led Jules to the back porch, the same porch where they'd stood in the eye of the hurricane. "Remember this spot?" he asked. "How could I forget? This is where I first thought about kissing you." "First thought about it?" "Okay, fine. First admitted to myself that I wanted to kiss you. I'd been thinking about it since you tackled me to save my life." Darius laughed. "That's a weird thing to find romantic. You literally threw yourself on top of me to protect me from flying glass. That's extremely romantic." "If you say so." They stood looking out at the ocean, visible now through the rebuilt trees. The water was calm, reflecting the sunset in shades of amber and rose. "Do you ever think about that night?" Jules asked. "About how different things could have been?" "All the time, if I hadn't come back, if that tree had fallen 5 seconds earlier, if you'd left when I told you to." "We wouldn't be here." "No, we wouldn't." Jules leaned her head against his shoulder. "I used to be terrified of storms. Now I'm grateful for them. Grateful for the way they strip everything down to what matters." "What matters?" Darius repeated softly. "You and me. This house, this community, building something that lasts." He turned her to face him, his hands on her waist. "You know what I love about you?" "What?" "You're not afraid anymore. Not of your mother. Not of failing. Not of being yourself." "I'm still afraid sometimes." "Being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means being afraid and doing it anyway. You taught me that." Jules smiled. "Pretty sure you taught me that." "Maybe we taught each other." As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in impossible colors, Darius and Jules stood together on the porch of Sterling Point. The house that had witnessed their beginning, that had tested them and shaped them and ultimately brought them home to each other. In the distance, thunder rumbled. Not a hurricane this time, just a summer storm rolling in off the ocean. "Rain's coming," Darius said. "Let it come." Jules took his hand. "We've got strong walls, a good roof, and each other. And each other, he agreed. They stood there as the first drops began to fall, washing the world clean. But they didn't run inside. They stayed exactly where they were, together, unafraid, ready for whatever came next. Because they had learned the most important lesson the storm had taught them. Love wasn't about perfect weather or easy days. It was about choosing to stand beside someone when the wind howled and the rain fell. It was about building something strong enough to weather any storm. It was about seeing someone clearly and choosing them. Anyway, again and again, every single day. And as lightning flashed over the ocean and thunder rolled across the sky, Jules and Darius stood together on the porch, holding hands, watching the storm come in. This time, they welcomed it. This time, they were ready. This time, they were home. Epilogue. 1 year later, Jules stood in the conservatory classroom, watching her students work on their final projects for the spring showcase. The Sterling Point Community Art Center had grown beyond anything she'd imagined. They now offered classes 6 days a week. Painting, sculpture, woodworking, photography. Darius taught the woodworking classes, and watching him work with the kids, patient and encouraging, made Jules fall in love with him all over again. "Ms. Jules?" One of her students, a teenage girl named Aisha, held up her painting. "Is this okay?" It was a portrait of the student's grandmother, rendered in careful, loving detail. The colors were bold. The brushwork was confident. "It's more than okay," Jules said. "It's beautiful. Your grandmother is going to treasure this." Aisha beamed. Jules moved through the room, offering encouragement and gentle corrections, and felt that deep sense of rightness she'd come to associate with this work. This was what she was meant to do. Not running a company, not living up to impossible standards. Her phone buzzed, a text from Darius. "Come to the workshop when you're done. Have something to show you." 20 minutes later, after her students had cleaned up and left, Jules walked to Darius's workshop in the old carriage house. He was standing beside a large piece of furniture covered with a sheet, grinning like a kid with a secret. "What is it?" Jules asked. "You'll see. Close your eyes." She did, laughing. She heard the sheet being pulled away, then Darius's hands on her shoulders, positioning her. "Okay, open." Jules opened her eyes and gasped. It was a cradle, hand-carved from cherry wood. Her own mother, unable to see a future beyond quarterly reports and shareholder meetings. And she thought about the woman she'd become. Someone who taught art to children, who'd restored a house and filled it with community, who'd chosen love over fear and never looked back. "Are you scared?" Darius asked softly. "Terrified," Jules admitted. "I don't know the first thing about being a mother. Good thing you're great at learning new things. And good thing the baby will have you as a father." Darius kissed her forehead. "We'll figure it out together, like everything else." "Together," Jules agreed. Outside, the spring wind rustled through the oak trees, new growth on old roots. The house stood solid and strong, ready for the next chapter. Ready for new life, new love, new storms, and new beginnings. And inside, two people who'd found each other in a hurricane held each other close and looked toward the future with open hearts and unafraid eyes. Because they knew now what they hadn't known before. The strongest foundations are built in the hardest storms. And love, real, true, courageous love, can weather anything. The end.